"You can stay with me," the poor maid said to the evicted mafia boss. And what happened next shocked him. The night Vincent Caruso lost everything, it was raining so hard the city looked like it was slowly melting. He stood outside the tall glass doors of the building he had called home for 11 years and watched two federal agents carry boxes out of his penthouse. His suits, his files, his phones. Each one packed into an evidence bag like it was worth nothing. Like he was worth nothing. His bank accounts had been frozen by noon. His lawyers stopped picking up their phones by 3 in the afternoon. By 6 in the evening, Vincent was standing on the wet pavement, with nothing but a dead phone and $40 he found crumpled deep inside his coat pocket. Money he didn't even remember putting there. He had no coat. He had left it upstairs. The neighbors who had smiled at him in the elevator for over a decade were watching from behind their curtains now. He could see the small movements. A curtain shifting slightly to the left, a silhouette stepping back into the dark. Not one of them came down. Not one person opened a window or called out his name. Vincent had told himself for years that this was the nature of his world. Powerful men don't have friends. They have people who are useful, and people who are afraid. He had believed this so completely, and for so long, that it had started to feel like wisdom. Standing in the rain that evening, soaked through to the skin with nowhere to go, he understood for the first time exactly what 20 years of living that way had actually cost him. For 2 decades, Vincent had been a very particular kind of man. He did not run his business in a loud or obvious way. There were no flashy cars, no dramatic scenes, no open threats made in public. He wore clean suits and took his meetings in ordinary restaurants and was unfailingly polite to everyone he spoke to. On paper, he was a property consultant. What he actually did was much more complicated than that and much harder to prove, which is why it had taken this long to catch him. He had built a structure of quiet influence, the way you build the foundation of a building, underground, out of sight, so that everything standing on top of it stays solid. He knew which city officials owed favors to whom. He kept careful records. He introduced the right people to the right people. He resolved disputes between men who could not go to the police. In the circles he moved in, he was the person problems came to when there was no legal solution available. He had been untouchable for so long that he had stopped being able to imagine anything different. Then, he heard a quiet voice behind him. "Mr. Caruso." He turned around slowly. A small woman was standing a few feet away, holding an umbrella with a broken spoke on one side that made it tilt awkwardly in the wind. She was wearing a cleaner's uniform, gray, with a small logo stitched onto the left side of the chest. He recognized her, the way you recognize a piece of furniture that has always been in the room. She worked the evening shift in his building. He had passed her in the lobby well over 100 times across the years. He had never once looked at her directly. She was looking at him directly now. "You can stay with me," she said. Not as a question, not with any kind of drama or hesitation. Just simply, the way you would say something that was obvious. Her name was Rosa. She was 54 years old, and she had been cleaning other people's things for most of her adult life. Their floors, their desks, the rings left in other people's bathtubs. She had come to this country decades ago with her young daughter, and the two of them had slowly, carefully built a life together in a 2-room apartment 12 blocks from the Regency Tower. When her daughter got sick 2 years ago, Rosa had been there every single day until the end. After that, it was just Rosa and her grandson Leo, 17 years old, quiet, serious about his schoolwork, and very good at making tea. Rosa took the bus to work every day, even through the worst of winter. She grew mint and basil on the kitchen windowsill, and she had a third plant in a chipped old pot that she simply called the old one. It had been alive in that same pot for 6 years, without any obvious reason to keep going. She went to church every Sunday, and came home, and cooked enough food for the whole week. She wore the same 3 pairs of shoes in rotation. She reused plastic bags by folding them into neat triangles, and keeping them in a kitchen drawer. She knew exactly how to make one chicken last for 4 different meals. She was the kind of person this city spent most of its time looking right through, and she had just offered her couch to one of the most feared men in the city. Vincent almost said no. He was a proud man, and pride is always the last thing to go. But the rain was getting colder, his phone was useless, and by now he knew that every hotel in the city had quietly received word. through the right channels, from the right people, not to check him in. And there was something about the way this woman stood there that stopped the refusal before it left his throat. No fear in her eyes, no fascination, no hidden angle, just an umbrella, held out slightly in his direction, and an offer that had already been made. He followed her. Rosa's building had a flickering light in the stairwell, and an elevator that made a grinding sound on the way up, like it was reconsidering things. Her apartment smelled of garlic and something warm and sweet he couldn't name. The furniture was old, mismatched chairs, a couch with a cover thrown over it, a kitchen table with a folded piece of cardboard under one leg to stop it wobbling. But every surface was clean. Everything was in its place. Leo looked up from his textbooks when they walked through the door. He looked at Vincent for a moment, then at his grandmother, and then said simply, "I'll get another chair." He went back to his books. Rosa put a pot on the stove. 40 minutes later there was food on the table. Rice, thick lentils cooked with cumin, tomatoes slow-cooked with onion, and fresh herbs from the windowsill. She set a plate in front of Vincent without any ceremony, and sat down and ate her own food. Leo closed his textbook, joined them, and the three of them ate together, mostly in silence. It was the quietest meal Vincent had sat through in years. He would not have admitted it at the time, but it was also one of the best. He told himself he would leave the next morning. He said the same thing the morning after that, and the one after that. 9 days passed. Somewhere in those 9 days, Vincent began to notice things he had never once paid attention to before. Rosa waking before 5 in the morning to make breakfast, moving through the kitchen in the half-dark, so quietly she barely made a sound. The way she saved everything. A plastic bag folded into a careful triangle, a jar kept for yesterday's sauce, stale bread turned into something completely different by the next day. The way she and Leo argued gently about whether the window near the table should be open or closed, and both always ended up slightly wrong, and neither of them seemed to mind. There was a photograph on the wall above the television, a young woman with Rosa's exact eyes, caught in the middle of a laugh. Every evening, before she went to bed, Rosa would stand in front of it for a minute or two and light a small candle. Just stand there quietly. Then she would blow it out and go to sleep. Vincent saw her do it one night when he couldn't sleep, and something about the smallness of it, the complete, private devotion of it, done with no audience and no performance, stayed with him in a way he didn't fully understand. He had built his entire life on knowing how to read people, knowing what they wanted, what they feared, where the soft spot was that you could press if you needed something. But Rosa gave him nothing to read. She wasn't performing kindness. She wasn't waiting for a reward. She wasn't afraid of him, and she wasn't trying to fix him. She just moved through her own life and let him exist quietly in the corner of it, without making it a thing. One night, after Leo had gone to sleep, Vincent found Rosa sitting at the kitchen table in the dark. Not doing anything, just sitting there with her hands in her lap. He sat down across from her without really deciding to. "Why did you help me?" he asked. She thought for a moment before she answered. Then she said, "Because you were standing in the rain. That was enough for me." He pushed. He told her she had read the papers. She knew exactly who he was and what he'd done. He asked how she could know that and still open her door. She looked at him directly and said, "I do know who you are. I also know that my daughter used to walk home late through that part of the city for years, and nobody ever bothered her. I heard you had a rule about that." She paused for a moment. "That doesn't make you a good man. But it told me there was a person somewhere inside all of this. So yes, I know who you are. I helped you anyway." Vincent had nothing to say to that. He went back to the couch and lay there looking at the ceiling until the sun came up. On the 7th night, there was a knock at the door. Rosa answered it before Vincent could get there. She already had the door open by the time he reached the hallway. The man standing outside was large and very still, in the way that certain people are still. Not because they are relaxed, but because they stopped being nervous about difficult things a long time ago. He was not a federal agent. He was someone from the part of Vincent's world that badges could not reach. Someone who had been waiting a long time for Vincent to be without protection, and who had finally seen the moment arrive. He told Rosa to step aside. She did not move. She stood in the doorway in her house slippers and her old gray cardigan, arms at her sides, and looked at this man without stepping back a single inch. Her expression held no anger and no performance. Just a quiet, firm steadiness, the kind that is much harder to hold than it looks. "This is my home," she said, "and nobody here belongs to you." The man stared at her. Several seconds passed that felt much longer than they were. Then he said something low to the people standing behind him, something Vincent couldn't quite make out, and they turned and left. Just like that. Rosa closed the door. She walked to the kitchen and put the kettle on. Vincent came around the corner and saw her hands, just for a second, before she got herself together, trembling against the counter. She had been terrified the whole time. She had stood there in that doorway afraid, and she had not moved anyway. He sat down at the kitchen table without saying a word. He stayed there for a long time. Something in him broke open that night. Not in a dramatic way, just quietly, like a door that had been shut for a very long time finally giving way at the hinge. He left before she woke up the next morning. But not before he used Leo's phone. The boy had quietly left it on the table the night before without being asked, to make 2 phone calls. The first call was to an old contact, someone who owed Vincent a debt of loyalty that no court order could reach. He spoke for less than 5 minutes. By the end of it, arrangements had been made for the ownership of Rosa's apartment building to transfer quietly to a private trust, with a legal document attached that said Rosa and her grandson were not to pay rent for the rest of their lives. Leo's name went into a separate fund, set aside and waiting for the day he was ready for university. The second call was shorter, just a few words sent through the right person to the right circles. A message that travels fast when it needs to. The woman in that apartment, and the boy, they are never to be touched. Not now. Not by anyone. Not ever. Then he found a receipt in his jacket pocket and wrote something on the back of it. He left it on the kitchen table. It said, "You didn't save me from the rain. You saved me from myself. I don't know if I'll ever be the kind of person you seem to believe I can become, but I'm going to try." Rosa found it when she came to make breakfast. She read it twice. She folded it carefully, walked to the drawer beside the photograph, and placed it inside. Then she stood in front of the photo of her daughter, lit the small candle, and stayed there for a long, quiet moment. Then she blew it out, got the kettle going, and started packing Leo's lunch for school. Because the bus does not wait, and life keeps moving, and that is exactly what Rosa had always known better than anyone. Some people spend 20 years building walls so high and so thick that nothing can reach them. And then a woman with a broken umbrella and a spare couch and a bowl of lentil rice walks straight through all of it. Not because she was trying to, not because she had a plan or a reason or anything to gain, but simply because she looked at a person standing alone in the rain and decided that was enough. That is the thing about real kindness. It does not negotiate. It does not calculate what it might get in return. It does not weigh up whether the person deserves it or not. It just opens the door. And sometimes, that turns out to be the most powerful thing in the world.